What would you do if the very person you trusted with your heart betrayed you in the most painful way? On my own matrimonial bed, I caught my husband with our pastor's wife, and in that moment, my entire world shattered. This is not just my story, it's a lesson about betrayal, pain, and the strength to survive. Stay with me till the very end, because what happened next will leave you speechless. And if you love real life stories that teach powerful lessons, make sure you subscribe right now and join me on this journey. The scream froze in my throat the moment I pushed open the bedroom door. My eyes could not believe what they were seeing, but there it was, clear as daylight, a betrayal too heavy for words. On my own matrimonial bed, the bed I had shared with my husband for almost 20 years, lay my husband and the one woman I had trusted with my spiritual life, our pastor's wife. Her hair was sprawled across my pillow, her skin glowing in the dim light, while my husband held her like I was the stranger in the house. For a second, I thought it was a nightmare. Maybe I had dozed off in the sitting room, and my mind was playing cruel tricks on me. But no, it was real. Their shocked faces told me everything. His eyes widened, her lips trembled, and the blanket they scrambled to cover themselves with only made the whole thing more disgusting. "Mary, wait. I can explain," my husband stammered, his voice trembling as though my presence had cracked open his world. But what explanation could possibly cover this? What excuse could erase the image burning itself into my mind? My legs trembled, my chest tightened, and a sound escaped my throat. A mixture of laughter and sobbing, like a woman who had finally gone mad. I wanted to scream, to tear down the curtains, to break the mirror on the wall. But my feet wouldn't move. My heart was shattered into pieces, but in that moment, I couldn't even cry properly. My soul was trapped between pain and rage, unable to decide which one was stronger. And then just as I was about to speak, just as the first words were forming on my tongue, something happened that would change everything. Rewind. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Margaret, but everyone in our neighborhood simply called me Grandma Maggie. I wasn't old enough to be a grandmother, but people loved giving me that name because I always had children from the church and community gathered around me. I was the type of woman people brought their secrets to, the type of woman people trusted. At least that was what I thought. I grew up in a humble home. Life was never easy for me, but I carried a cheerful heart wherever I went. When I married my husband, Richard, people said I was the luckiest woman alive. He was tall, charming, and the kind of man who could speak softly and make the whole room listen. He was also very active in the church, respected by our pastor and trusted with many responsibilities. At first, our marriage was sweet. Richard made promises every day. Promises of love, of a better future, of walking through life together. And for a while I believed him. But slowly little cracks began to show. Cracks that I ignored because I thought every marriage had its storms. One of those cracks was his closeness to the pastor's wife, Patricia. She was beautiful, graceful, and everyone admired her. She was also kind to me, often calling me sister, and checking on me whenever she could. I welcomed her with open arms, never suspecting the poison slowly brewing behind the smile. Richard and Patricia often worked together in church programs, choirs, meetings, and special visits. Sometimes he would come home late, saying they had to prepare sermons or practice songs. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Who would ever suspect that the pastor's wife could betray her own husband with mine? But life has a way of showing you truth in pieces. The first time I noticed something strange was when Richard started hiding his phone. He used to leave it on the table or the bed, never caring if I touched it. But suddenly, it became like his second skin. If it rang, he would dash across the room to grab it. If a message popped up, he would tilt the screen away from me. I asked him about it once, but he brushed it off, laughing. "Margaret, you worry too much," he said, kissing my forehead. "These are just work messages, church matters. You know people can't do anything without me." I laughed along, though deep inside, a little voice whispered, "Something is wrong." Then came the lies. He would say he was going to a church meeting, but when I got there myself, I wouldn't find him. When I asked Patricia about it, she would smile, touch my hand gently, and say, "Oh, Sister Maggie, he just stepped out a few minutes ago. You know how busy he is." And I would believe her. But the worst was yet to come. One evening after a long day, I decided to surprise Richard with his favorite meal, pounded yam and egusi soup. I spent hours in the kitchen, singing and humming, happy just to see him smile. But when the food was ready, he didn't come home. I called him again and again, but he didn't answer. Around 11 p.m., he finally walked in, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. "Where have you been, Richard?" I asked, my voice soft but trembling. "Oh, church work," he replied quickly, brushing past me. That night I couldn't sleep. The scent on his shirt was too strong, too sweet, too feminine. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he hugged someone after prayer. But my heart kept pounding with suspicion. Still, I stayed quiet. Because sometimes, silence feels safer than truth. Weeks passed and the signs grew louder, but I ignored them, until the day came when God Himself decided to open my eyes. It was a Sunday afternoon. Church service had ended, and everyone had gone home. Richard said he needed to stay behind for a meeting with the pastor. I went home, prepared lunch, and waited. Hours passed, but he didn't return. Something in me, call it a woman's instinct, told me to go and look for him. I didn't find him in the church. I didn't find him in the pastor's office. I didn't find him in the choir room. I walked back home with heavy steps, praying silently that I was wrong. And then, just as I pushed open my bedroom door, my world collapsed. I froze there, staring at them in disbelief. My husband, my pastor's wife, both caught like thieves in the night. The air in the room grew thick, pressing against my chest. Patricia scrambled off the bed, her face red with shame, her voice shaking. "Maggie, it's not what you think." But I wasn't blind. I wasn't stupid. I took a step forward, my hands trembling so badly I thought I would collapse. And just as I opened my mouth to speak, just as my soul prepared to pour out the storm within me, something unexpected happened. My chest was rising and falling like I had run 1,000 miles. My whole body shook as though the floor beneath me was breaking apart. My husband Richard's mouth moved, but I could barely hear the words. The only sound in my ears was the pounding of my own heart. "Margaret, listen to me," he begged, stretching out his hand as if to calm me. "It's not what it looks like. Please let me explain. Not what it looks like." The words cut through me like a sharp knife. How many times had women heard those lies? How many times had broken husbands tried to patch their sins with cheap excuses? Patricia was trembling too, clutching the blanket to her chest. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her lips moved silently, whispering a prayer, or maybe cursing me under her breath. I couldn't tell. I laughed. Yes, I laughed like a woman who had lost her mind. The sound scared even me. It echoed in the room, filling the silence. "Not what it looks like," I repeated, my voice cracking. "Then what is it, Richard? Is this Bible study? Is this choir practice? Or is this fasting and prayer?" The sarcasm dripped like poison from my lips, and he flinched. "Please, Maggie," Patricia whispered at last, her voice as soft as a mouse. "Forgive me. I don't know what came over me. The devil." "Don't," I snapped, raising my hand to silence her. "Don't you dare blame the devil for this. The devil didn't bring you to my bed. The devil didn't strip off your clothes. You both did this yourselves." Her face crumbled as tears ran down her cheeks, but my eyes were fixed on Richard, my husband, the man who had sworn before God and man to love me, honor me, and stay faithful. The man who had prayed with me every morning and led us in family devotion. The man who had looked into my eyes on our wedding day and promised me forever. That man was now standing half naked in front of me, begging like a child caught stealing sugar. I wanted to scream, to curse, to throw him out. But all I could do was stand there, frozen in place, my body shaking with rage and sorrow. He stepped forward, but I moved back. "Don't touch me," I hissed. "Don't you dare lay your filthy hands on me." His face fell. His eyes filled with tears. "Margaret, I love you. I don't know how this happened. Please let me explain. Please don't destroy us." I looked at him in disbelief. Destroy us? Did he really think I was the one destroying this marriage? Did he really think his betrayal was something that could be swept under a rug with a few sweet words? But before I could answer, something strange happened. A knock came at the door. I froze. My heart jumped into my throat. Who could it be? The neighbors? The pastor himself? My children? The knock came again, Harder this time. Mummy? Are you inside? It was my daughter, Susan. My blood ran cold. She was only 17, innocent, with the world still shining in her eyes. If she saw this, if she discovered what I had just walked into, her whole life would change forever. I rushed to the door, blocking it with my body. Yes, Susan, I'm inside. I called out, my voice shaking. Are you okay, Mummy? I heard shouting. I swallowed hard, glancing back at the shameful scene behind me, my husband standing there, Patricia clutching the blanket like her life depended on it. I'm fine, my dear, I lied, forcing my voice to sound steady. Go back to your room. I'll join you soon. There was silence on the other side of the door, then soft footsteps fading away. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. But the relief was short-lived, because in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just about me. This betrayal wasn't only my wound to carry. If it ever came out, it would destroy my daughter's faith, her trust, her innocence. And suddenly my anger doubled. I turned to Patricia, my voice low but sharp. Get out. She looked at me, shocked. Please. Maggie. I said get out. I roared, pointing to the door. She scrambled off the bed, clutching the blanket around her body like a shield. She gathered her clothes in trembling hands, tears streaming down her face, and stumbled out of the room without another word. Now it was just me and Richard. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. My chest burned with 1,000 questions. But only one left my lips. Why, Richard? Why her? He sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. I don't know. I don't know how it started. One day, we were talking after church and she listened to me in a way no one else did. I was weak, Maggie. I was stupid. My heart cracked again. She listened? So my 20 years of sacrifices, prayers, meals cooked, clothes washed, sleepless nights with sick children, they meant nothing because another woman listened? Tears streamed down my face as I shook my head. Do you know what you've done, Richard? Do you know how deeply you've broken me? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our children, our pastor, our church, and God himself. He sobbed, reaching for my hand, but I pulled it away. At that moment, I wanted to leave. I wanted to pack my bags and walk out forever. But where would I go? What would I tell my children? What would I tell the church? The weight of it pressed down on me like a mountain. I turned to leave the room, desperate for air, when suddenly I heard a voice from the doorway. Is it true? My blood froze. Standing there, his eyes wide with shock, was Pastor John, Patricia's husband. The room went silent, so silent that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. My heart stopped in my chest, and I felt my knees weaken. There, standing in the doorway with his eyes wide and his mouth slightly open, was Pastor John. The very man who trusted us. The very man whose wife had just fled from this same room in shame. Pastor, Richard whispered, his voice breaking like a man about to be sentenced. But Pastor John didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved slowly around the room. First to me, standing with tears still streaming down my face. Then to the bed, our bed, where the sheets were tangled like evidence of war. Then finally to Richard, who sat half-dressed, his head bowed low. The silence was heavy, but I could feel the storm building in the pastor's chest. His breathing grew louder, his fists clenched. So, he said at last, his voice trembling with rage. It's true. It's true what I just saw. My wife and you. He pointed a shaking finger at Richard, his face twisting with disbelief. On your bed? On the bed you share with your wife? Richard, have you no fear of God? Richard jumped to his feet, his hands raised as if to surrender. Pastor, please, it's not what it looks like. I swear. Not what it looks like. Pastor John thundered, his voice echoing through the room like rolling thunder. I just saw her leave this room in shame. I see you standing here like a guilty thief. And you dare tell me it's not what it looks like. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to make it clear that I was the victim here, not the accomplice. But my lips wouldn't move. My body was frozen, as though the ground beneath me had turned to ice. Pastor John's eyes turned to me. For a moment, I thought he would blame me too, that he would accuse me of inviting this disgrace into my own home. But instead his gaze softened. His anger wasn't for me. It was for the man who stood trembling in front of him. Margaret. he said softly, his voice breaking. I am so sorry. You did not deserve this. You trusted her. You trusted him. And look what they have done. His words stabbed at my heart. Because it wasn't just my marriage that had been destroyed, it was his too. 2 homes shattered in a single night. 2 souls crushed under the weight of betrayal. Richard took a step forward, his hands shaking. Pastor, please forgive me. I was weak. I don't know what came over me. It was the devil's trap. Don't. Pastor John roared, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Don't you dare blame the devil for your greed. The devil didn't carry you to this bed. The devil didn't make you touch what was not yours. You did this, Richard. You. Richard collapsed back onto the bed, burying his face in his hands. He sobbed like a child, but there was no pity in my heart. I had cried too many tears already. The air in the room grew heavy again. None of us spoke. Only the sound of Richard's weeping filled the silence. Finally, Pastor John turned to leave. His shoulders were stiff, his steps heavy. At the door he paused and looked back at me. You have a choice to make, Margaret, he said quietly. But whatever you do, remember this, God sees and God will judge. And then he was gone. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with the man who had torn my heart to pieces. I sank into the chair by the window, staring out at the night sky. The stars twinkled above, uncaring of my pain. The world outside moved on, while mine had stopped. Richard crawled across the floor to my feet, grabbing my hands and pressing his forehead against them. His tears wet my skin, but I pulled away sharply. Don't touch me, I whispered, my voice shaking. Maggie, please, he sobbed. Don't leave me. Don't destroy this home. Think of our children. Think of everything we've built. I turned my face away. You should have thought of that before you brought shame into this house. His sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing but emptiness. My heart was numb. Hours passed. I didn't move from the chair, and he didn't stop weeping. The clock ticked, the night grew colder, but my soul stayed heavy. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to creep into the room, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice. It was Susan's voice. Standing at the half-open door, her eyes wide with tears, she whispered the words that pierced my soul. Mummy, is it true? Did Daddy really betray you? The room spun when I heard Susan's voice. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. My little girl, my innocent 17-year-old daughter, stood at the door with tears streaming down her cheeks. Her lips trembled as she repeated the words. Mummy, did Daddy really betray you? Richard's head shot up, his face pale as a ghost. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward her. Susan, no, you don't understand. It's not what you think. But Susan stepped back quickly, her eyes filled with anger and hurt. Don't lie to me, Daddy. I heard everything. I saw Pastor John leaving. I heard Mummy crying. Tell me the truth. Her voice broke, her small body shaking as though she would collapse. I rushed to her side, pulling her into my arms. She clung to me tightly, sobbing into my shoulder. My heart cracked into 1,000 pieces as I stroked her hair, whispering, It's okay, my child. It's okay. You don't need to carry this pain. But Susan pulled back suddenly, her eyes burning with rage. No, Mommy. It's not okay. How could he do this to you? To us? How could you, Daddy? Her voice rose, trembling with pain. You always told us to respect marriage, to stay faithful, to fear God. You preached to me about purity, about waiting for the right man, about trust. And this is what you do. Richard covered his face, groaning as if the weight of her words crushed him. Susan, please. I failed, I know. But don't throw away everything I've ever taught you because of my mistake. Mistake. Susan shouted, her fists clenched. Sleeping with Pastor's wife is not a mistake, Daddy, it's a choice. Her words cut the air like a sword. Richard staggered back, unable to reply. I held Susan tighter, my own tears blinding me. This was what I had feared most. Not just my pain, but my children's. How could she ever trust again? How could she look at her father the same way? The room grew heavy with silence. Richard sank to his knees, sobbing loudly. God, forgive me. Please forgive me. But Susan wasn't moved. She pulled away from me, her face hard. Mummy, we can't stay here. We can't live with him anymore. He doesn't deserve us. Her words pierced me deeply, because part of me agreed with her. But another part of me, the part that had lived with this man for almost 2 decades, the part that had built a family with him, hesitated. Where will we go, Susan? I asked softly. What about your brother, Daniel? What about school? We can't just leave overnight. But Susan shook her head fiercely. I don't care, Mummy. I'd rather live in a single room with you than stay in this house with him. He disgusts me. Richard cried harder, crawling toward her. Susan, please don't talk like that. I love you. You're my daughter. But she stepped back again, spitting the words. No. You lost the right to call yourself my father the moment you betrayed Mum. Her words struck him like a hammer. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest, gasping for breath. I rushed forward, panic rising in my chest. Richard, what's happening? His body shook violently, his face twisted in pain. He clutched his chest tighter, struggling to breathe. Oh my God! I screamed. Susan, call your brother. Call the neighbors. Your father is. But before I could finish, Richard let out a loud groan and fell backward, his eyes rolling into his head. My heart stopped. Daddy! Susan screamed. Daddy, no. We both fell to the floor beside him, shaking his body, shouting his name. But his chest heaved unevenly, his lips trembling as though death itself had stepped into the room. And in that terrifying moment, I realized the storm was only just beginning. Daddy! Daddy, wake up! Susan screamed, her voice sharp with terror. She shook his body with all her strength, tears pouring down her face. I pressed my trembling fingers to his neck, searching desperately for a pulse. My heart nearly stopped when I couldn't find it at first, but then I felt a faint beat. Weak and irregular. Thank you, God. I whispered through my tears. He's still alive. Susan grabbed my arm. Mummy, what do we do? He's dying. Run. I cried. Go call Daniel. Tell him to get help. Now. Susan dashed out of the room, her footsteps echoing through the house. I stayed on the floor beside Richard, holding his head in my lap, my own tears falling onto his face. Richard, stay with me, I whispered, shaking. Don't you dare leave me like this. If you must go, you will go after facing me. Not like a coward. His lips moved faintly, a broken sound escaping his throat. I leaned closer, straining to hear. I'm sorry, he whispered. A sob tore through me. Even in his weakness, those 2 words cut deep. Moments later, Daniel, our 15-year-old son, rushed into the room, his face pale with fear. Mummy, what happened? Help me lift him, I said quickly. We need to get him to the hospital. Together, we managed to drag Richard out of the room and into the neighbor's car, which Daniel had hurriedly arranged. Susan climbed into the back seat, still sobbing uncontrollably. I sat beside Richard, holding his hand as the car sped toward the hospital. The ride felt endless. Every bump in the road, every second that ticked by, stretched like eternity. Richard groaned weakly, his body trembling in my arms. I prayed silently, my lips moving without sound. God, please. Not like this. Not in shame. If you must take him, give us time first. Give him a chance to repent truly. When we reached the hospital, nurses rushed him into the emergency ward. Susan tried to follow, but I pulled her back gently. We can't go in now, I said softly, though my own voice trembled. We have to wait. So we waited. Minutes turned into hours. Susan wept into my arms. Daniel sat silently with his head buried in his hands. My heart pounded with every passing moment. Finally, the doctor came out. His face was calm but serious. Your husband had a mild heart attack, he explained. The stress and emotional shock weakened him. He's stable now, but he needs rest, medication, and most of all, peace of mind. If he doesn't find peace, it will happen again, and next time it may be fatal. Relief and pain washed over me at once. He was alive but broken. And we were broken too. We were allowed to see him later that evening. Richard lay on the hospital bed, pale and weak, his eyes red from tears. When he saw us, guilt filled his gaze. Maggie, children, his voice cracked. I don't deserve you. Susan turned her face away sharply, refusing to look at him. Daniel stood stiff, his fists clenched at his sides. I stepped closer, my heart heavy. Richard, you nearly died today. Do you realize that? Tears filled his eyes. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I was gone. Don't say that. I snapped, anger flaring in my chest. Death is not an escape from responsibility. You brought us shame, Richard. You betrayed your vows. But you're still alive because God wants you to face the consequences. He covered his face and wept bitterly. The silence in the room was unbearable. Susan finally broke it, her voice hard as stone. I will never forgive you, Daddy. Richard's sobs grew louder. Daniel stood silently, but I could see the storm in his eyes. The boy worshipped his father once. Now he looked at him like a stranger. That night, after we returned home, I sat alone in the sitting room, staring into the darkness. My thoughts were heavy, my spirit torn between love and hate. How do you forgive a man who destroyed everything you held dear? How do you rebuild trust when the very foundation is shattered? But another voice whispered in my heart. If you don't forgive, what example will you set for your children? I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. Pastor John was there, standing at Richard's bedside. His face was stern, his arms folded across his chest. I froze at the doorway. The sight of him filled me with dread. When he saw me, he nodded slightly. I came to tell him something, he said coldly. And you should hear it too. He turned to Richard. You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my trust. My wife confessed everything last night. I cannot stay with her anymore. She has gone to her family's house. Our home is broken because of your greed. Richard's eyes filled with fresh tears.
Pastor, I'm sorry.
I can't say enough to repair it. There is nothing you can say, Pastor John replied firmly. But know this, God is watching. Your sin will follow you until you repent fully. And Margaret. He turned to me, his eyes softening. You have a choice. You can either let bitterness consume you, or you can rise above this pain and rebuild your life, with or without him. The choice is yours. Then he left. I sat by Richard's bed, his weak hand reaching for mine. Maggie, he whispered, his voice faint. Do you hate me? I stared at him for a long time. Hate? No. My heart was too tired to hate. But the wound was deep, and I didn't know if it would ever heal. I don't hate you, Richard, I said quietly. But I don't trust you either. Trust is earned. And right now you have nothing left but shame. His lips trembled, his eyes closing as fresh tears slipped down his face. Susan walked into the room just then, her school uniform still on. She had come straight from class. She looked at her father lying there weak and broken. For a moment I thought she would soften. But instead she whispered the words that cut like a knife. If you die tomorrow, Daddy, I will not cry. Richard gasped, his chest heaving with pain. The monitor beside his bed began to beep wildly. Nurses rushed in shouting orders. I screamed, grabbing Susan and pulling her back. What have you done? But it was too late. Richard's body convulsed, the nurses fighting to save him. And as I stood there, holding my daughter in shock, I realized this was the true cost of betrayal. Not just broken vows, not just shattered trust, but children scarred forever. The sound of the heart monitor echoed in the room like the beat of a drum. Beep, beep, beep. Then suddenly flat. Code blue. A nurse shouted, pushing us out of the way. My scream ripped through the air. No. Richard. Please. Susan stood frozen, her school bag still hanging from her shoulder, her eyes wide with shock. Daniel pulled her close, his hands shaking as the doctors worked frantically on their father. I pressed my palms together, falling to my knees right there on the cold hospital floor. God, please. Not now. Not like this. If you will take him, let it not be in bitterness. Give us a chance to heal. Please, Lord. For what felt like an eternity, we watched the doctors fight to bring him back. Then miraculously, the monitor beeped again. Weak, slow, but alive. Relief flooded me so powerfully that I nearly fainted. The doctor turned to us after stabilizing him. He had another attack, triggered by emotional stress. If you want him to live, you all must stop surrounding him with words of anger. He needs peace, not pain. His words struck like thunder. I turned to Susan, who was trembling in Daniel's arms. Her lips quivered as tears poured down her cheeks. Mummy, I didn't mean. I was angry. I didn't want him to die. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. I know, my child. But words are powerful. Sometimes sharper than knives. We must be careful. That night, I sat alone by Richard's bedside. His breathing was shallow, his body fragile. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, each breath looking like a borrowed gift from heaven. For the first time in years, I saw him not as my betrayer, but as a human, weak, broken, flawed. And for a moment, my heart softened. Around midnight he stirred, his eyes slowly opening. Maggie, he whispered, his voice faint. I'm here, I said, leaning closer. He struggled to speak, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve the children. But if God lets me live, I want to change. I want to make things right. I looked at him, my heart torn in pieces. Could a man who broke his vows ever truly change? Or was this just fear of death speaking? Before I could answer, his eyes closed again and sleep took him. The next morning Pastor John returned, but this time his face carried no anger, only deep sadness. He sat quietly beside me, staring at Richard. I prayed last night, he said finally. I asked God why he allowed this betrayal, and the answer I received shook me. Perhaps it was to test our hearts, to see if we would destroy each other with bitterness or choose forgiveness, no matter how hard. I sighed heavily. Forgiveness is not easy, Pastor. Every time I look at him, I see the betrayal. And my children, they may never heal from this wound. Pastor John nodded slowly. True. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't even mean trust will come back. But it is the only way to stop the poison from destroying you. His words stayed with me long after he left. Later that day, Susan entered the room quietly. She looked smaller somehow, her face pale from lack of sleep. She walked up to her father's bed and stood there silently. Richard opened his eyes and looked at her, tears filling them instantly. My daughter, he whispered, his voice breaking. I hurt you more than anyone. I broke your trust, your respect. I failed you as a father. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I'm sorry. Susan stood still, her lips trembling. Then she burst into tears. I hate what you did. But I don't want you to die. I want you to live and change. Just don't ever break us again, Daddy. Richard cried openly, reaching for her hand. She hesitated, then slowly placed her hand in his. For the first time since the storm began, I saw a small crack in her wall of anger. Daniel, however, was different. He refused to enter the room. When I begged him to visit, he shook his head firmly. Mummy, I don't want to see him. He's not my father anymore. My father wouldn't hurt us like this. His words pierced my heart like knives. That evening I sat outside the hospital on a bench, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. The colors reminded me of my own life, bright once but now stained with pain. A nurse came to sit beside me, a woman I had seen many times in the ward. She looked at me kindly. You are the wife? She asked gently. Yes, I whispered, staring at the fading light. She nodded knowingly. I see many families here. Heart attacks don't just come from the body. They come from broken hearts, guilt, secrets. If you and your children keep pouring anger on him, he will not survive. But if you choose to give him peace, even a little, it may save his life. Her words hit deep. They were simple, but true. That night, when I returned to Richard's room, I sat beside him and held his hand, not as a wife in love, but as a fellow human giving comfort. Richard, I whispered, I don't know if I can ever be your wife the way I once was. But for the sake of our children, and for the sake of peace, I will not let hatred kill us all. If you want to live, then fight for it. Fight to become a man they can respect again. His eyes filled with tears. He squeezed my hand weakly and whispered, I will. The days turned into weeks. Richard's health slowly improved. His body grew stronger, though his spirit remained heavy with shame. Susan began to visit more often, her heart softening day by day. Sometimes she even smiled faintly when he cracked a weak joke. But Daniel remained distant. He stayed at home, burying himself in his studies, refusing to mention his father's name. One evening I found him sitting alone on the balcony, staring into the night sky. "Son," I said softly, sitting beside him, "why won't you visit your father?" His jaw tightened. "Because he's dead to me, Mummy. Maybe he's breathing, but inside he's already gone. I don't need him anymore." Tears filled my eyes. "Daniel, hatred is a heavy burden. Don't let it shape you into something hard. He made mistakes, yes, terrible ones. But he's still your father." Daniel turned to me, his eyes burning. "And you? Do you still see him as your husband after everything?" The question cut deep. I couldn't answer immediately. Finally, I whispered, "I see him as a man who failed, but who is trying to stand again. Whether I accept him as my husband again is a question only time can answer." Daniel looked away, his silence heavier than words. Back at the hospital, Richard asked me one evening, "Maggie, when I get out, will you let me come home?" I froze. That was the question I had been dreading. Home. The house where trust once lived but now lay in ashes. "I don't know," I whispered honestly. "The children are not ready. I am not ready. Healing takes time." His eyes glistened with tears, but he nodded slowly. "Then I will wait. For as long as it takes. Even if it takes forever." For the first time I believed he meant it. That night, as I walked out of the hospital, I realized something. The affair had not only broken my family, it had forced us to confront the darkest parts of ourselves. Anger, hatred, revenge. And yet it had also forced us to see the power of forgiveness, even in small doses. Richard was alive, but the battle for his soul was far from over. And deep inside me I knew the real test was yet to come. The day Richard was discharged from the hospital, the air in our home grew heavy. Susan helped me tidy his room, placing fresh sheets on the bed and setting a glass of water on the bedside table. But Daniel sat in the living room, his headphones plugged in, refusing to move. When Richard finally walked through the door, leaning on a walking stick, silence swallowed the house. He looked around, his eyes soft, his face pale from weeks of weakness. Susan greeted him shyly, almost whispering, "Welcome home, Daddy." Richard smiled faintly, his lips trembling. "Thank you, my angel." But Daniel didn't even look up. He kept his eyes glued to his phone, pretending not to notice. The rejection sliced Richard like a knife. He lowered himself into the chair, his hands trembling as he spoke. "I know my return brings pain. But I'm here, not to claim rights as a husband or father, but to beg for a chance. One chance to prove I can change." His voice cracked. "Even if you never forgive me, at least let me serve you with the years I have left." I swallowed hard, my emotions torn. He was trying, yes. But trust is not rebuilt in a day. At church the following Sunday, the whispers began. As soon as I stepped into the sanctuary, I felt the weight of 100 eyes. Women nudged each other, men shook their heads, and some avoided me altogether. "Isn't that Margaret? The one whose husband slept with pastor's wife?" One woman whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "Yes," another replied. "And she still lets him back in her house?" "Humph, weak woman." Their words burned me like fire, but I kept walking, holding Susan's hand tightly. Daniel, however, refused to attend. He said church had become a place of gossip, not healing. When Pastor John stood to preach, his voice trembled with emotion. "Today I speak on forgiveness. Not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. We all carry scars. Some are visible, some are hidden. But healing begins when we stop pointing fingers and start asking God to mend our hearts." I knew his sermon was directed not just at the church but at me. Still, it didn't stop the stares. At home the tension worsened. One evening, while serving dinner, Daniel pushed his chair back roughly and stood. "I can't eat with him here. Mummy, why are you letting him sit at this table like nothing happened? He betrayed us. He betrayed God. Why should we pretend?" Susan's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, he's still our father." Daniel snapped, his voice sharp. "Not mine. He's a stranger who broke our home." Richard sat frozen, his spoon shaking in his hand. He didn't fight back. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lowered his head and whispered, "You are right, Daniel. I don't deserve this seat. But please, Let me earn it back. Daniel stormed off, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed like thunder in my chest. I stared at Richard, my heart torn. How long could we live in this house divided? Weeks passed, and slowly Richard tried to rebuild. He began helping more around the house, washing dishes, fixing broken furniture, even planting flowers in the garden. Sometimes I caught him kneeling in the living room late at night, praying silently with tears streaming down his face. Susan noticed, too. One evening she whispered to me, "Mummy, maybe he really is trying." I nodded, though doubt still lingered. "Time will tell, Susan. Time will tell." But Daniel grew colder by the day. He refused to be in the same room with his father. Sometimes he even avoided me, locking himself in his room for hours. One night, I went to him. "Daniel, my son, please talk to me." He turned sharply, his eyes burning. "Mummy, stop defending him. You think he's changed? Men don't change. He's only pretending until you trust him again. Then he'll hurt you worse." I touched his shoulder gently. "Not every wound means the end, Daniel. Some wounds can heal. But if you let bitterness control you, it will poison your future." But he pulled away, shaking his head. "No, Mummy. I'll never forgive him." His words chilled me. Then came the day that changed everything again. It was a Friday evening. The house was unusually quiet. Susan was studying in her room. Richard was in the garden, watering the flowers. I was preparing dinner when I realized Daniel wasn't home. I called his phone repeatedly, but no answer. Hours passed. Anxiety gnawed at my chest. Finally, around 11 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, my heart dropped. 2 police officers stood there, holding Daniel by the arm. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. "Are you his mother?" one officer asked sternly. "Yes," I gasped, rushing forward. "What happened?" The officer sighed. "We found him in a street fight. He was caught with a group of boys causing trouble. He's lucky we're releasing him into your care instead of taking him in." My heart nearly stopped. Daniel, the boy who once dreamed of becoming a lawyer, was now being dragged home by the police. Richard rushed forward from the garden, his face pale. He reached for Daniel, but Daniel jerked away. "Don't touch me." Daniel spat. "This is all your fault. You destroyed this family, and now you've destroyed me too." His words echoed through the house, shattering what little peace remained. And I realized in that moment, the storm was far from over. The words still rang in my ears like thunder. "This is all your fault. You destroyed this family, and now you've destroyed me too." Daniel's voice, full of rage and pain, cut through the walls of our home like a blade. The officers released him into my arms. His body was tense, trembling with anger, his face swollen from the fight. My heart cracked as I held him, but he pushed me away. "I don't need pity, Mummy," he spat. "I just need freedom from this prison you call family." Richard stood frozen at the doorway, his walking stick clutched tightly. His face was pale, his eyes wet with shame. For once, he didn't try to defend himself. He just stood there, broken, watching his son slip further away. Later that night, Daniel sat in his room, refusing to eat or speak. Susan hovered outside his door whispering, "Daniel, please, don't shut us out. We're your family." But he didn't reply. I sat with Richard in the living room. The silence was thick, only broken by the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, Richard whispered, his voice shaking, "This is all because of me. If I hadn't betrayed you, if I hadn't lost myself, Daniel wouldn't be like this." I looked at him, my chest heavy with grief. "Yes, Richard. You broke us. You broke him. But crying over it won't fix it. If you want to be a father, then stand up and face your son. Not with excuses, but with truth." He nodded slowly, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Tomorrow. I'll speak to him tomorrow." The next morning, Richard knocked gently on Daniel's door. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, the door creaked open. Daniel glared at him, his arms folded. "What do you want?" Richard's voice was soft. "To talk. Just 10 minutes. Then if you still hate me, I'll leave you alone." Daniel scoffed but stepped aside reluctantly. Inside, the room was messy, clothes scattered, books tossed carelessly on the floor. It wasn't the Daniel I knew. the disciplined boy with dreams of law school. This was a boy drowning in anger. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his cane resting beside him. He looked at his son with red, tired eyes. "Daniel," he began, "I won't waste your time with excuses. I did the worst thing a man could do to his family. I betrayed your mother. I betrayed God. And I betrayed you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then why are you still here? Why don't you just leave us alone?" Richard's voice cracked. "Because running away won't heal you. And it won't heal me. I don't want to die knowing I left my son broken. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to earn back your respect." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Respect? You lost that forever." Richard bowed his head. "Maybe so. But I'll keep trying, even if it takes my last breath." For the first time, I saw Daniel's face soften, just a little. The anger was still there, but behind it was hurt. Deep raw hurt. "You destroyed everything I believed in," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. "You told me men of God were to be respected. You told me marriage was sacred. You lied to me." Richard's tears flowed freely now. "Yes. Elite. I was weak. And I hate myself for it. But please, son, don't let my failure destroy your future. Don't let my sins become your prison." The silence was heavy. Then, slowly, Daniel turned his face away, whispering, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Richard placed a trembling hand on his son's shoulder. "Then don't forgive me yet. Just let me love you while I wait." For the first time in months, Daniel didn't pull away. Weeks passed. Healing came slowly, like drops of water carving through stone. Richard kept trying. He helped Daniel with his studies, even if Daniel barely responded. He walked Susan to school some mornings, listening as she chattered about her dreams. He sat quietly with me in the evenings, not demanding affection, just offering presence. The community still whispered. Some church members still pointed fingers. But little by little, I stopped listening. Because I realized something. People talk, but they don't live in your house. They don't feel your pain, nor do they carry your burdens. One Sunday, Pastor John called us forward. "This family has walked through fire," he said, his voice firm. "They have been broken, yes, but God is not done with them. Betrayal has wounded them, but forgiveness is the medicine that will carry them forward." To the congregation I say, stop gossiping. Instead, pray for them. His words silenced the whispers, at least for that day. The final test came one evening at dinner. For months, Daniel had eaten in silence, barely acknowledging his father. But that night, after finishing his meal, he looked up at Richard. "Dad," he said quietly. The word dad hit like lightning. Richard froze, tears filling his eyes instantly. Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't forgive you yet. But I don't hate you anymore." It was a small step but a powerful one. Richard's tears rolled freely as he whispered, "Thank you, son. That's more than I deserve." Susan reached across the table, holding both their hands. I watched them, my heart swelling with a strange mixture of pain and joy. We were not healed completely, but we were healing. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything we had been through. Betrayal, shame, heartache, anger, but also prayer, forgiveness, and second chances. I realized something important. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean trust is instantly restored. It means choosing peace over poison. It means allowing time to rebuild what was broken. Richard may never fully erase the scars he left, but he was trying. And sometimes trying is the first step to becoming whole again. As I drifted off to sleep, I whispered to myself, families are not destroyed by storms. They are destroyed when we stop fighting to rebuild after the storm. Love is not blind. It sees the flaws, the failures, and the wounds, yet still chooses to hope. And that was the lesson my life had given me. Life lesson. Betrayal can shatter trust, but holding on to anger can shatter your soul. Forgiveness does not excuse the wrong, but it frees the heart to heal. Families are not perfect. They are fragile. But with patience, truth, and courage, even broken homes can find a way to stand again. My heart was racing, and I knew things would never be the same again. But what happened after this moment was even more shocking. Do you want to know what came next? Then don't miss the next chapter of this story. Before you go, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would do if you were in my shoes. Your thoughts matter, and I can't wait to read them.